Question from our listener. Here it is. Do you have to tithe to a church? And the rest of the question goes like this. If there's a month when an individual or a family member that you know is in need, they could use that money that you have allocated each paycheck for tithing. Is it wrong to give it to them before you give to your church, providing it was all the money you had to give and you couldn't come up with any other money to help them?
It's a very specific question.
It is.
Especially towards the end.
Towards the end there. They got
very
specific.
So I would start with, is it wrong to, isn't that the
No,
phrase?
so do you have
Do you
to?
have
Do
to
you
tithe
have
to a
to?
church?
Legally.
So I just want to say, from point of view of, if I guess if what you mean by that, is it a sin?
Yeah, I
Is
would
it
think.
something I have to repent of if I don't? No.
Right.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? If that's what you mean,
Yeah.
am I sinning if I don't? No. I think I take the whole teaching about money, because there is a passage in Deuteronomy that says the reason I tithe is to remind me that I trust God.
There you go.
The tithing is a gift to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about a have to. It's a way to remind me in a tangible way that I trust God.
Mm-hmm.
I take something that's very important to me, I worked for, I want to spend it all, and I remind myself by setting aside apart a regular portion of my money, I tangibly trust God. I don't just believe I trust Him.
There you go.
I trust God by giving away something that I know I could use for something I want or need. Mm-hmm. And I've done that. I've given away money that I literally needed. Mm-hmm. I mean, I needed because I wanted to remind myself I trust God. So I don't think there's a have to. That's the way I would say it.
But I would also say to this person, because you set up the scenario, I'll speak to the scenario you gave. If there were someone, because I think Jesus speaks real clearly to this, if there were someone who used tithing to the church as an excuse to not give to someone in need,
Now you're wrong.
you are sinning. And I think Jesus made that very clear when he called out the Pharisees and said, you've got this rule where, you give all your money to the church and you tell your parents, I can't take care of you, and you're violating the law of honoring your parents by doing that. Like Jesus gave a I think that's an equatable situation.
I don't disagree with that at
It's
all.
somebody who's using a law, and I'm doing air quotes, law or rule
to keep me from loving
keep
someone.
me from loving, to keep me from being generous. And I said this in the warm-up to the podcast. Rules, if you take a rule by its nature, a rule is limiting. It is meant to limit your activity. The law of Jesus, as he laid out to us in the kingdom, is generosity. That's we are to be generous people. And so if I take a rule and I use it to limit my generosity, I have now violated the kingdom value that Jesus has given his followers of generosity. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think it goes to, we bring this up, but I just think it's a different way of looking at the Bible. And it certainly is new to me when I first started trying to just imagine the Bible in this way, of that if you're looking through the Bible, looking for rules or a list of things of check marks, I got to do these things so I'm good with God. One, you've obviously misunderstood the gospel, because the point of the gospel is not you. I think you said this in a recent sermon, right? It's not the good I do for God. It's the good that Jesus has done.
Yes.
Well, it's not a way. The Bible is not giving me ways that I can fix my problems.
Right.
It's making really clear to me, I can't fix my problems, but if I align my life with Jesus and follow Him, He will help me fix my problems.
And what the Old Testament part of really the whole Bible, it is giving me a picture. When you look at you talk about Deuteronomy there. When you look at Deuteronomy, it's a picture of, in that specific context at that period of time, what would it look like if a people of God would live like God was their king? And so he gave very specific commands that were, some of them and many of them, very particular to that context and time. So that's when people are like, well, what about, do I have to do this thing about no two different kinds of cloth? Well, that's a different kind of thing. But there is a picture in there in Deuteronomy, and I just looked it up. Now I forget. It's Deuteronomy 15, I think, but you can look in there, where God says to the people of Israel, there should be no poor people among you.
Right.
Well, that never gets fulfilled until the book of Acts, where what's now the new Israel, which is the church, there's this description of the people of Jesus who they sell their possessions. They give it to the church that they would be distributed among them. And then it gives us, there were no needy or no poor people among them. And it means among this group of people that they took this principle of generosity, but also this idea that was of tithing, which was we're supporting the work of God, the work that God is doing. And the way I would say it to teenagers often when I was teaching teenagers is, what God's trying to do is form you into the kind of person that looks like Jesus. And Jesus says, my body, my physical representation in this world is the church. And so if you're a person who loves Jesus, you support his body. You support what's going on, and you support that in any way that you can. That sometimes means you're investing your time, right? And you're serving, you're investing your energy in that way. We do small groups around it. You're investing in the relationships in here, that I'm there to encourage you, to help you, to spur you on to good deeds. But it does mean I invest my resources. Now, once again, as we've said, if you make it this rule that I have to do this and I can't do this, I think the question, though, and I don't want to just, because I know there's a lot of things, but this is where I think we as followers of Jesus have to wrestle with is there a way that I may have to shape my finances in such a way that I can both regularly give to support what God's doing through the church, and that I would be able to help someone else in need.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
That's where I'm getting to. Now, once again, as you've mentioned, you don't want to make a rule of it that then says, well, since I'm not there, then I can't give to help this person. I think that's you and the Spirit of God got to work that part out. But to then say, well, because I don't have to tithe to the church, then I'm just going to hold that money and wait until a point when I can find someone in need and give to them in that way. I feel like that's also missing the spirit of it.
I'm going to actually, in a couple of weeks, well, maybe at this point it's already happened because we tape, beforehand. I'm going to teach about that passage where you talked about the people took and sold and gave and all that about this. When you start dealing with all of these passages in a way that's not about, hey, this is to remind me I trust God, and so I trust him in every one of these situations. If it's been brought out to me that this is what I should do, I think God's completely okay with that. And it's not about earning something with God. Everybody in the New Testament church did not sell their possessions to give. It said some of them sold their possessions. I'm guessing it's the ones that felt called by God to do that.
Right.
It wasn't everybody in the church, now bring everything you have and lay it at the apostles' feet. But I'm mentioning that message, and this is true for me. If I had my druthers, I would rather to be totally in control of what happens with my money, including the part that I give away. But there's a part of that where it says they took and laid it at the apostles' feet and they distributed. There's a good deal of humility that says, I'm giving this to God, so I am hands off. I'm hands off. I don't get to decide. And there may be even things that I wouldn't have done that they decide to do that I would not have. And it takes me out of it so that I not only trust God in the giving, I trust God in how it gets dealt with. Now, I give to the church and I try to help other people. In fact, I know I've told you all a practice I have at Christmas. I've now expanded it to other times of the year where I carry funds around for the sake of regularly being able to say to God, I have this money that I am ready to give away to whoever you bring to the attention that you say to me they need this money. That's in addition to what I would say. And for me, it's not 10%, just so you know.
Right.
My wife helped us get beyond that some time back. But, because it's not a legalistic thing. Tithe literally means 10%, so it's not a top or a bottom,
Well, and we've talked.
That's what I would say about this. I would say if you're led by the Spirit of God to give this money to your family to take care in this situation, that's the only money you have to give. Just say that to God. You're not earning anything with God either way.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, and we've used this term before in sermons, I know, but it's the difference between a bounded set of principles and a center set principles, which means bounded set means tell me where the boundaries are so I know I mean, no one says this, but to me, what's the minimum I have to do to get to stay in the group?
I'm in or out.
Tell me whether I'm in or out. And a centered set of principles say, what is it that ultimately I want to get to? Where's the best place for me to be? And you don't even necessarily tell me the boundaries, but you're telling me where you want me to be. And so when you talk about, like you said, there was no mandate you have to sell your possessions and give to the church. But by showing, hey, this is what it looks like when people who can and their hearts are really submitted, it's that level of generosity. Man, that gives me something to strive for, not a bare minimum that I go, tell me what I have to do so God doesn't get mad at me. And I'm not saying that's what this person's doing. What I'm saying is these kind of questions fit more into a bounded set than a center set. And I think if we become the kind of people that what I'm looking for is, how do I get involved in a community where your needs and my needs, they get all tied up together. And sometimes I have more than you do. Well, and some, and I can participate.
Well, and I think about the instances in the New Testament where the people of Jesus, one I can think of where Jesus notices somebody giving something and he commends them. Mm-hmm. And what he says about it is not that they gave what they could. Mm-hmm. He said they gave all that they had.
Yes. Right.
They gave all that they had. Then I think about the instance you've already brought up in Acts chapter 4 where it talks about, and they sold and they gave that to meet the needs of others. I think about Paul receiving an offering where eventually the chapter after he talks about this is the line that God loves a cheerful giver, where he says the Macedonian Christians gave to meet the needs of the people in Jerusalem, which they would never meet or know, but they shared. And he said they gave beyond what they could afford to give. Mm-hmm. They gave beyond what was comfortable to them to meet the needs of these other people. The only time I see it really ever being commended New Testament-wise is not some kind of level of, hey, they met the standard. Good for them. They met the standard. Yeah. It's always, look at that, man. Mm-hmm. Obviously, when you give everything you have, it's, again, a symbol. I trust God. God's going to give me something. If I need it, God will take care of it. That's what that is a symbol of. Mm-hmm. And believing that God put us in a body, and just because I'm in Macedonia and they're in Jerusalem, they have a need. God gave me some, so I'm going to share with them. God will take care of me when I have a need. That's where we ultimately are trying to get with money. I had a conversation, right outside this door here, where we're in the lobby, with a guy who was talking about, and he was talking to me about money. And he said, I've been around here he was saying 15 years, I didn't know how long. And he said, I've heard you all teach 10, 10, 80 a bunch of times. He said, I don't do that. He said, but I'll say this, the people I know who are the most generous people, they all do that.
Well, and I have a side point that kind of goes to that, and I don't want to detract. I think we've kind of exhausted this question, so I can bring up a side point that it's little to do with this.
So, Jason, you got anything you want to add?
You go ahead.
Okay. The side point I want to have is to parents, in particular of young children. The thing you just said about 10, 10, 80 that I think is huge, that gets to the people who
let's be clear in case listeners don't know it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Give the first 10% away, save the next 10% for future, and then live on 80%.
Right.
That's what they're talking about.
That's right.
I learned that since the time I first started getting allowance when I was probably kindergarten age. And one thing I would just love to really push for parents, especially if you have young children in the home, is teaching this as a principle of what we do as a family and really getting it. One thing, and I've become more and more convinced of this, is that one of the chief purposes, or at least benefits, of church communities is that there is moral formation that goes on that is beyond this is good, this is bad. There are rhythms that get into us that make it where if my baseline is 10, 10, 80, it's easier to be generous from that point. And there's a way in which, and I think this is true of the church, we used to always, at least with kids, and with adults, we would have 5 G's. And one of these are ways we talked about spiritual growth. And one of the G's was giving. And so I would often sit with teenagers every 5 weeks and we talk about giving. They didn't have money. And I would just implore them over and over and over again, find a way by talking to your parents about this, because there is a way that just as part of your rhythm, your character development, that you go, everything that comes to me, I give part of it away. Mm-hmm. Everything that comes to me, I give part of it away. And I'm responsible for the future, so I save some of that. But the idea that everything that comes to me, I give some away. We're doing this with our daughters right now in very small quantities with an allowance. We give them every month, and we say, you give this part away and all of that stuff to God. And it's not huge money. In fact, because it's not that much money, they haven't even brought it yet. And my wife was like, well, should we just have them bring every time they have $1 come and bring it, or do we bring it at one point? And I said, the point for them to understand is that every time I get my allowance, I take part of that money and I give it to God to say, thank you, I trust you, I don't need this, I'm willing to give it to support what you're doing. That is such a critical part of development that for my whole life, this has never even been a question for me. And I don't mean that as a point of judgment or pat myself on the back, because I didn't do that for me. Now, as an adult, I make the decision. But if I want to be honest, I have this question, it's not even a decision. I don't even think about it. And not in like I have to. In a literal, it's just in the budget. I don't even think about it. It automatically comes out. I don't even think about it. And it allows me during other times to be generous in other ways. And I just want to, if we have any young parents listening, I think it is so critical.
And Jason, I know you taught your family that as well.
Yeah, and I've told this story in many places. When the month that I started coming to Community Christian Church was the month that my wife and I got married, and we heard that message. Never heard it before, and we went home and said, well, that's a plan. We don't have one. Let's do that one.
Yeah.
And that really was the long and the short of it. And we just said, okay, we don't have a plan. Let's use that one. And so from that day on, we just started it. And it was much easier then, of course, because we didn't have much.
Right.
So we started it early. And then we were able to just continue to grow with that.
That's right.
All through the years. And, to the point where now, like Nathan just said, it's an automatic, non-negotiable for it's just the way we live. And it has afforded us the opportunity to be generous and to not, and because I think God is so generous to me, He has now given me a whole 25-year marriage where we have never once had money stress.
Yep, that's right.
There's margin baked into our life that we just don't argue about it, we don't stress about it, because we've got that cushion built in that He has provided. And looking back, it always floors me how much He has allowed me to give away.
Yeah.
And now it's a blessing to me, because hopefully I've been a blessing to some people that I don't even know about.
That's right.
Because I've released that. We've given generously to causes that we love and are continuing to do that. We sponsor kids in other countries, but we give to support the local church. And I've seen fruit come out of that. And, I suspect that when all things are wrapped up and Jesus comes back, I'll see clearly what all that was. Not as a pat me on the back, but as a look at what God was able to do.
Yes. It's, for me, it has become the easiest evidence of if you do what God tells you to do.
Yeah.
Blessing is not just somewhere off in the kingdom. You get blessed, and not in the way that TV preachers, and I know we're on YouTube right now, but I mean the kind that go, give and you'll get back tenfold. I mean, if you will do what God says to do, money is just the easiest one to see the evidence in. I have now come to believe that's the reason we can test it. We care about it. It's very tangible to us. You can count it up. You can add it up. You know whether you've been blessed or not.
That's right.
And but it is true in every area of my life.
Sure
when
is.
I do it the way God says to do, there is blessing that comes my way. And when I don't, there isn't.
That's right. Yep.
So I think you're okay if if you really believe God's leading you to do this, don't think about it legalistically either way.
That's
Yes.
right. Yep.